They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but I never intended to end up here. If you'd told me years ago that I'd sell my soul, that I'd chant in blood-soaked rituals, that my voice would carry the weight of demons, I would have laughed. But now I feel the chains of my own choices tightening around me every night. 15 years ago, I was just a girl from the countryside of a small island, singing for coins at the local bar, dreaming of a life beyond the hills and sheep pastures. I didn't know then what I was stepping into. I didn't know the cost of ambition. When the demon whispers to me in the studio, I remember the first time I met him. He wasn't a red-skinned monster with horns. No, he was subtle, clever, a shadow in the form of a man, a voice that promised everything I thought I wanted. But let me not get ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up here, haunted and hollow, you need to hear it from the beginning. You need to know what I gave up to stand under the bright lights, to hear millions screaming my name, to see my songs climb the charts and my bank account swell with zeros. It all started on a cold autumn night in the countryside. My hometown was a place you could forget as soon as you left it. The air smelled of damp earth and smoke from wood-burning stoves. Life moved slowly and the people didn't dream big. My family was no different. "You've got a lovely voice," my mother would say, patting my hand at the dinner table. "But music doesn't pay the bills." Still, I sang every chance I got. Weddings, funerals, the bar on Friday nights. People would stop and listen, some even teary-eyed by the time I finished. But no matter how much they loved my voice, I knew I was going nowhere. That night, though, something was different. The bar was packed, the kind of crowd that made my nerves hum. I stood on the tiny wooden stage, the dim overhead bulb casting long shadows on the walls. I was halfway through my set when I noticed him. A man sitting alone at the back, his face hidden under the brim of a hat. He didn't clap like the others. He just stared, his eyes glinting like dark coals. When my set ended and the applause died down, he approached me. His suit was expensive, his shoes polished to a shine. Everything about him screamed out of place in this backwater pub. "You've got a gift," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "The kind of voice that could change your life. If you're willing." I laughed nervously, clutching my guitar. "Thanks, but I'm not sure what you mean." He handed me a card, black and glossy with gold lettering. "Call me. I work with people who can make dreams happen." 2 weeks later, I was on a flight to New York. The city hit me like a wave. Noise, lights, movement, everywhere. It was intoxicating, and for the first time I felt like I was on the edge of something big. The man, he never told me his real name, just asked me to call him Mr. D, brought me to a sleek high-rise building. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of money. Gold records lined the walls, and the receptionist barely glanced at me as she ushered us into a plush office. A woman sat behind a massive desk, her sharp features softened only by the dim light filtering through the blinds. She introduced herself as Eleanor, the head of the label. "Sing," she said simply, nodding toward the grand piano in the corner. My palms were slick with sweat, but I obeyed. I sang a ballad I'd written, my voice trembling at first but steadying as I lost myself in the melody. When I finished, the room was silent. Eleanor smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was calculating, predatory. "You'll do," she said. I wasn't the only one. 2 other girls were signed the same day. Jasmine, stunning and sultry, with a voice like liquid gold, and Amara, fierce and edgy, who radiated confidence. We were competitors from the start, though we didn't say it out loud. Jasmine was the obvious favorite. The label poured money into her image, molding her into their vision of the perfect pop star. Amara and I were left in her shadow, fighting for the scraps of attention she didn't need. A year passed, and none of us had a breakout hit. Then Jasmine disappeared. The official story was that she quit, but whispers told a different tale. They said she refused to play the Hollywood game, a sinister phrase I didn't fully understand yet. But I would. After Jasmine was gone, the pressure on me intensified. My first album flopped, and the label's disappointment was palpable. "You've got talent," Eleanor told me one night, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But talent isn't enough. You need an edge." That's when Mr. D reappeared. He invited me to a party, promising it was a chance to network. I didn't know then what kind of party it would be or what I'd be asked to do. But when I walked into that room, lit with blood-red lights, filled with the scent of incense and something metallic, I knew I'd stepped into a different world, and that was just the beginning. The party wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. I arrived at the address Mr. D had given me, a mansion tucked away in one of New York's wealthiest neighborhoods. The gates alone were taller than my family's cottage back home. As my driver pulled up, I felt the first flicker of unease. The air was thick with an electric charge, as though the house itself was alive and waiting. Inside, it was opulence layered with shadows. Chandeliers cast eerie patterns on the marble floors, and the walls were adorned with paintings that seemed to watch you as you moved. Guests milled about, their laughter too loud, their smiles too wide. They were all beautiful, dressed in black and white, their faces painted with an unsettling calm. Mr. D appeared beside me like a ghost, his hand light on my shoulder. "Relax," he said, his voice smooth and low. "This is where stars are born." At first it seemed like just another high society event. Waiters glided through the crowd with trays of champagne, and a string quartet played softly in the background. But the longer I stayed, the more I noticed the cracks beneath the glamour. People whispered in corners, their eyes darting nervously. Some wore masks that obscured their faces entirely, their laughter too hollow to be real. And then there was the art, paintings and sculptures of figures contorted in agony, surrounded by symbols I didn't recognize. When I asked Mr. D about them, he just smiled. "Art is subjective," he said. I was introduced to Eleanor, who greeted me with her usual cold smile. "You've been invited here because you have potential," she said, her voice like silk over steel. "But potential alone isn't enough. Tonight is about proving you're ready to be part of something greater." Before I could ask what she meant, she led me into a smaller, dimly lit room where a group of people had gathered. At the center was a table, its surface covered with a crimson cloth. On it sat a small, intricately carved box. Eleanor gestured for me to step forward. "Open it," she said. My hands trembled as I reached for the lid. Inside was a contract, written in a language I couldn't read, alongside a pen that gleamed like polished bone. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Eleanor's smile widened. "An opportunity," she said. "A commitment to greatness, to leave your mark on the world. All we ask is that you sign." I hesitated, but Mr. D stepped closer, his presence unnervingly reassuring. "You've worked hard to get here," he said. "This is the final step. Think of what you could achieve. Fame, fortune, immortality. It's all within your reach." I thought of my family, of the life I wanted to leave behind, the endless gigs in dingy bars, the hopeless dreams of making it big. I wanted more. I needed more. My fingers closed around the pen, and as I touched it to the paper, I felt a sharp prick in my palm. Blood welled up, dark and thick, staining the contract as I signed my name. The room seemed to shift, the air growing heavy, the faces around me blurred, and I felt a pressure in my chest, as though something unseen was watching, waiting. "Welcome," Eleanor said, her voice reverberating strangely. "You've taken your first step toward destiny." The rest of the night was a haze. The party grew darker, the laughter more unhinged. People danced wildly, their movements almost animalistic. I saw things I couldn't explain, shadows that moved independently of their owners, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. At one point, I stumbled into a room where a group of men and women sat in a circle, chanting softly. In the center was a girl, no older than I was, her eyes wide with terror. I backed away before anyone noticed me, my heart pounding. By the time I left, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the city. My mind was spinning, but one thing was clear. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The next morning, I woke to find my phone flooded with messages. The label wanted me in the studio immediately. My career was about to take off, they said. But as I stared at my reflection in the mirror, I noticed something strange. My eyes, normally a soft hazel, seemed darker, almost black around the edges. And when I blinked, I thought I saw a shadow move behind me. I shook it off. It had to be the exhaustion, the lingering effects of the night before. But deep down, I knew better. The studio was buzzing when I arrived, but it didn't feel like the warm hum of excitement. It felt like static, charged and heavy, as though something invisible pulsed just beneath the surface. Eleanor greeted me with a nod, her sharp eyes glinting with satisfaction. "You're ready," she said. "Today, we start shaping your legacy." I didn't feel ready. The events of the night before clung to me like a second skin, and the shadow I'd glimpsed in my mirror wouldn't leave my thoughts. But I forced a smile and followed her into the booth. They gave me a beat, dark and brooding, and told me to freestyle. At first, my voice wavered, but then something shifted. A chill swept through me, and my mind went blank. Words poured out of me, lyrics I hadn't written, phrases I didn't even understand. My voice was raw, guttural, almost primal. When the track ended, the room fell silent. "Play that back," Eleanor said. As the sound filled the studio, I barely recognized myself. My voice sounded possessed. It was haunting, magnetic. Every note charged with an energy I couldn't explain. "Perfect," Eleanor whispered. "You found it." I hadn't found anything. Something had found me. Over the next few weeks, everything accelerated. My voice seemed to take on a life of its own, and the songs I recorded became hits before they were even released. My face was everywhere. Billboards, magazine covers, TV spots. But the more successful I became, the more the darkness followed me. I started having dreams, or maybe they were nightmares. In them, I was standing on a vast, burning stage, my audience faceless and writhing. A figure loomed behind me, its features indistinct, but its presence suffocating. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my chest tight, the whispers of a voice I couldn't understand still echoing in my ears. It wasn't long before I saw the shadow again, this time while I was wide awake. I was in the studio finishing a recording session when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned expecting to see one of the producers, but the booth was empty. Yet in the reflection of the glass, I saw it, a dark, shifting form, watching me. "What's wrong?" Mr. D asked, appearing at my side. I hesitated, swallowing hard. "Nothing," I lied. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Keep your focus. You're on the brink of something great." The first time I performed my new single live, the reaction was immediate and terrifying. The crowd seemed hypnotized, their movements synchronized as though they were one entity. Their cheers felt more like a chant, growing louder and more frenzied with every note. As I sang, I felt it again. That chill, that weight pressing down on me. My voice didn't feel like my own. It was deeper, more commanding, and the audience responded to it like puppets on strings. When the song ended, the applause was deafening. But as I looked out over the sea of faces, I saw something that made my blood run cold. For a split second, their eyes glowed red. I confronted Mr. D after the show. "What's happening to me?" I demanded. "What's going on with the music, with the audience?" He tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "You're experiencing success," he said simply. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" "This isn't normal," I said, my voice rising. "People don't just act like that." He sighed, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You've been chosen," he said. "Your talent has unlocked something extraordinary. Embrace it." His words should have been comforting, but they weren't. They felt like a warning. As my career soared, the strange occurrences only grew more frequent. Lights flickered during performances, shadows moved where they shouldn't, and I started hearing whispers in the studio. Soft, insistent voices that spoke in a language I couldn't understand. One night, after a particularly grueling session, I stayed behind to work on lyrics. The studio was empty, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. As I scribbled in my notebook, the whispering began again. But this time it was louder, clearer. I looked up and there it was, the shadow. It stood at the edge of the room, its form shifting and roiling like smoke. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice shaking. It didn't answer, but I felt its intent, a cold, consuming hunger. And then it moved closer. I ran, my heart pounding, and didn't stop until I was outside in the cold night air. When I told Eleanor about the shadow, she didn't look surprised. "Everyone sees it eventually," she said. her tone eerily calm. "It's part of the process." "What process?" I asked, my voice breaking. She leaned in, her expression unreadable. "You've made a pact, whether you realize it or not, and the price of greatness is always high." That was when I realized the truth. My success wasn't mine. My voice, my songs, my fame, they all belonged to it. And it wasn't done with me yet. Fame was supposed to feel like freedom, but I'd never felt more trapped. The shadow wasn't just something I saw in dark corners anymore. It was in every performance, every studio session, every silent moment when I thought I was alone. Its presence was constant, pressing against me, whispering in a language I couldn't understand, but somehow felt in my soul. And the worst part? The more I gave to my music, the stronger it became. It started with the dreams again. This time I wasn't just standing on a burning stage, I was part of the fire. The crowd reached for me, their hands clawing at my flesh, their mouths chanting a guttural, otherworldly hymn. Behind them the shadow loomed, its form larger than before, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. I woke up screaming, my throat raw. My sheets were soaked with sweat, and my bedroom felt colder than the dead of winter. But when I turned on the light, I saw it. A figure stood at the foot of my bed, its body shrouded in smoke, its face indistinct except for its eyes, glowing, burning, staring straight at me. "Leave me alone," I screamed, throwing a lamp at it. The object passed through the figure and shattered against the wall. The shadow lingered for a moment, then dissipated, leaving behind a faint smell of sulfur. The next day, I confronted Mr. D. "What is happening to me?" I demanded, storming into his office. He didn't look surprised or concerned. Instead, he poured himself a drink and gestured for me to sit. "You're progressing," he said simply. "Your connection is deepening." "Connection to what?" He sighed, swirling his glass. "To the source of your power. Do you think those billboard hits came from nowhere? That your face plastered on every screen in the country was a coincidence?" I stared at him, the room spinning. "What did I sign up for?" "You signed up to be great," he said, leaning forward, "and greatness always requires sacrifice." As my star rose higher, the sacrifices became more apparent. It wasn't just the music anymore. It was my image, my life, my very identity. Eleanor began pushing me to be more provocative, more daring. "Sex sells," she said, handing me a script for a music video that felt more like softcore porn than art. I resisted at first, but resistance wasn't an option. The label had ways of making you comply. "You're one of us now," Eleanor reminded me during a particularly heated argument, "and we protect our own. But if you want to survive in this industry, you'll have to stop fighting and start obeying." Obedience came at a price. One night, I was invited to another party, this one even more exclusive than the first. Eleanor called it a networking opportunity, but I knew better by now. The mansion was even grander, the guests more powerful. CEOs, politicians, actors, even religious leaders mingled in the opulent rooms, their smiles sharp and cold. But beneath the surface, the party reeked of something darker. I was led to a private room where a group of men and women waited. They were older, their faces lined with the kind of power that comes from decades of controlling everything and everyone around them. Eleanor introduced me, her tone dripping with false warmth. "She's one of our brightest stars," she said. The men smiled, their eyes lingering on me too long. I felt like prey, caught in the gaze of predators. "Prove your loyalty," one of them said, his voice low and commanding. I didn't know what he meant, but the answer became horrifyingly clear when the doors locked behind me. That night was the first of many. They took what they wanted, leaving me broken and hollow. I told myself it was the price of success, that it was worth it for the fame and fortune. But every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the truth. I wasn't me anymore. I was a puppet, a vessel, a shell filled with something dark and unholy. My music became darker, more hypnotic. Fans described it as otherworldly, addictive, life-changing. Concerts turned into frenzied spectacles, with audiences fainting, crying, even speaking in tongues. And every time I stepped on the stage, I felt the shadow growing stronger. It was in my voice, my movements, the way the crowd responded to me as if under a spell. The demon, because that's what it was wasn't just haunting me anymore. It was inside me. I tried to fight back, to regain some semblance of control. I threw myself into other ventures, fashion, real estate, philanthropy, hoping to distract myself from the darkness consuming me. But no amount of money or success could fill the void. At night, I still saw the chains, felt the flames, heard the whispers. I knew where my soul was, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the debt came due. It was supposed to be a casual meeting, a gathering of the industry's elite to celebrate the success of my latest single. That's what Eleanor said when she summoned me to the penthouse of one of New York's most exclusive hotels. By then, I had learned that Eleanor's invitations were never what they seemed. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with a scent I couldn't place, earthy and metallic. Around a massive oval table sat some of the most powerful people in the world. Music executives, political leaders, tech moguls, even the founder of a global megachurch whose sermons I'd watched as a child. They greeted me with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Welcome," said a man at the head of the table, his voice deep and commanding. His face was familiar. I'd seen it on the cover of countless magazines. He was one of the most powerful CEOs in the world, a man whose name was synonymous with wealth and influence. "You're no longer just an artist," he continued, his piercing gaze locking onto mine. "You're a piece of the machine now, a vital cog in something much larger than yourself." As the night went on, I began to understand what something larger meant. They spoke openly, their words dripping with arrogance. They discussed world events as though they were pieces on a chessboard, moving countries, economies, and entire populations with a flick of their hands. It was unsettling, not just because of what they were saying, but because of how easily they did it. Famine, war, disease. These were tools, not tragedies. And then the conversation turned to me. "We've been watching your progress," said a woman whose face I recognized from a major news network. "You're doing well, but there's still more to achieve." I didn't know what to say. My mouth felt dry, my heart pounding. "That voice of yours," another man said, leaning forward. "It's more than talent. It's a gift, and it's time to use it for something greater." They handed me a folder, its contents marked with strange symbols. Inside were documents outlining my next steps. Albums, tours, collaborations. But there was something else. Instructions for appearances at private events, coded phrases to include in my songs, and even the colors and symbols I was to use in my music videos. "Your image is your power," Eleanor explained, "and through you we'll reach millions, influence them, shape them." I wanted to ask what they meant, but a single glance from the man at the head of the table silenced me. "You've already made your choice," he said. "Now it's time to deliver." That night I left the penthouse feeling more like a pawn than a person. The documents burned a hole in my mind, their implications too vast and terrifying to fully comprehend. I wasn't just making music anymore. I was part of a global agenda, a machine designed to control and manipulate on a scale I couldn't fathom. And the worst part, I couldn't walk away. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, studio sessions, and performances. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the darkness was always there, lingering at the edges of my vision. The shadow, the demon, wasn't just haunting me anymore. It was guiding me. When I sat down to write, the words came unbidden, flowing from my pen as though someone else were holding it. When I recorded, my voice carried a power that frightened even me. And when I performed, the crowds responded as though they were under a spell, their faces rapturous, their movements synchronized like puppets on strings. Then came the parties. I was no stranger to excess by now, but these gatherings were something else entirely. Held in sprawling mansions and secluded estates, they began like any other high society event. Champagne, laughter, whispers of deals being made. But as the night wore on, the mask came off, both figuratively and literally. I saw things I couldn't unsee: orgies, rituals, blood sacrifices. At one party, I stumbled into a room where a child's cries were muffled by chanting. I wanted to leave, but Eleanor caught my arm. "Don't look," she said, her voice cold. "You're not here to question. You're here to belong." One night after a particularly disturbing event, I broke down. I was in my penthouse, staring at the city lights, feeling the weight of everything I'd done, everything I'd become. The shadow appeared again, this time standing right in front of me. "Why me?" I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Why are you doing this to me?" Its voice came then, low and guttural, filling my mind with a sound that wasn't human. "You invited me," it said. "You opened the door, and now you're mine." I fell to my knees, my body shaking. "What do you want?" I asked. "Everything," it replied. The next day, my manager called to inform me that I'd been nominated for multiple awards. My latest single was breaking records, and a global tour was in the works. But none of it mattered. Every accolade, every dollar, every standing ovation felt like another chain around my soul. And the whispers in my dreams grew louder, more insistent. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were screams. Fame was a strange thing. It gave me everything I thought I ever wanted. Yet it stripped away all that I truly was. By this point, my name was a household word. I couldn't step outside without being mobbed by fans, cameras flashing, voices screaming my name. My face was plastered on billboards, my songs played on every station, my merchandise sold in every store. But in the quiet moments, when the lights were off and the applause faded, I was utterly alone. The nightmares became more vivid. In one, I was standing in a cavernous hall, its walls dripping with black ichor. The floor was made of jagged obsidian, and chains hung from the ceiling, swaying as if caught in an invisible wind. The shadow was there, but it wasn't alone. Figures surrounded it, hooded, their faces hidden. They chanted in unison, their voices merging into a single, horrifying sound. At the center of the room was a throne, carved from bones, its occupant watching me with eyes that burned brighter than fire. "Your time is near," the figure on the throne said, its voice like the grinding of stone. I woke up screaming, my body drenched in sweat, my chest tight with an unbearable weight. But when I looked in the mirror, the worst part wasn't the exhaustion etched into my face. It was the faint, glowing chain marks around my neck and wrists, as though they had been burned into my skin. I threw myself into work, desperate to drown out the whispers in my head. My next album was unlike anything I had ever created. The lyrics felt like they were written in blood, the melodies haunting, the production layered with sounds that sent shivers down the spine. Fans called it a masterpiece, a revolution. But I knew the truth. I hadn't written it. The words came to me in a trance, my hand moving across the page as if guided by an unseen force. In the studio, I didn't feel like myself. My voice carried a power that wasn't mine, the notes slicing through the air like a blade. Even my team noticed. "There's something different about you," one producer said, his tone uneasy. "It's like you're on another level." He didn't know how right he was. The album's success was meteoric. Every track was a hit, dominating charts worldwide. I broke records, won awards, sold out arenas. But the price for that success was becoming unbearable. The shadow, my demon, was no longer a silent presence. It spoke to me now, its voice a constant murmur in my mind. It told me what to say in interviews, how to act in public, even what to wear. When I resisted, it punished me. One night, as I stood on the stage in front of thousands of screaming fans, my body froze. My mind screamed for me to move, to sing, to do anything. But I was paralyzed. The demon's voice filled my head. "Obey, or you will lose everything." When I finally regained control, the crowd erupted in cheers, oblivious to my internal battle. But I knew I was losing. The parties became darker, the rituals more horrifying. I stopped asking questions. Every time I tried to understand what was happening, I was met with threats or cryptic answers. At one event, I saw something I would never forget. A group of children, their eyes wide with fear, being led into a room while the elite laughed and drank. I tried to intervene, but Eleanor blocked my path. "Don't," she said firmly. "You can't save them. You can't even save yourself." Her words cut deep because I knew they were true. I spiraled. Drugs, alcohol, anything to numb the pain and quiet the voices. But nothing worked. The demon's grip on me tightened. I could feel it in my chest, my veins, my very soul. It wasn't just haunting me, it was becoming me. During one studio session, I blacked out. When I came to, the entire team was staring at me, their faces pale. "What happened?" I asked, my voice shaky. "You," one engineer began, but he couldn't finish. Another producer stepped forward. "You were speaking in some weird language," as he said. "And your voice, it wasn't yours." I laughed it off, blaming exhaustion, but deep down, I knew the truth. My life felt like a horror film on a loop. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders of what I had become. The mansion I lived in felt more like a prison. Its halls were filled with whispers, its mirrors reflecting things that weren't there. One night I found a note on my bedside table. "You can't escape. The deal is sealed." I didn't recognize the handwriting, but the message was clear. Eleanor arranged another meeting with Mr. D. "I want out," I said as soon as I walked into his office. He laughed, the sound cold and hollow. "Out? There is no out, my dear. You're in this for eternity." Tears streamed down my face. "I didn't know it would be like this. I didn't know." "You knew enough," he interrupted, his tone sharp. "You wanted the world and now you have it. But nothing comes for free." That night I sat in my room, staring at the city lights, feeling the weight of my choices crushing me. I could hear the demon's voice, mocking me, reminding me of the chains that bound me. And as I closed my eyes, I saw the flames again, felt the heat, heard the screams. I knew where my soul was. I knew who it belonged to. The more I tried to fight it, the stronger its hold became. By this point, I wasn't sure where I ended, and the demon began. My thoughts, my actions, even my desires. They weren't my own anymore. And yet the world loved me. My face was everywhere. My music played in every corner of the globe. Fans worshipped me, their devotion bordering on the fanatical. But beneath their cheers, I saw the truth. I wasn't inspiring them. I was controlling them. The first time I noticed the full extent of my influence was during a concert in Paris. The arena was packed, the air electric with anticipation. As I sang, something strange happened. The crowd moved as one, their arms raised, their bodies swaying in perfect unison. It wasn't natural. I could feel the demon's presence, thick and oppressive, feeding on their energy. It whispered in my ear, its voice dripping with malice. "They are yours now," it said. "Their souls belong to us." I wanted to stop, to scream, to warn them, but my body kept moving, my voice carrying the song to its crescendo. By the end of the performance, the crowd was in a trance, their faces blank, their eyes glazed over. When I left the stage, I collapsed, my body trembling. "Magnificent," Eleanor said, helping me up. "You've transcended. This is what true power looks like." The power came with a cost. I started seeing things, shadows moving where they shouldn't, faces staring at me from mirrors, voices calling my name when no one was there. At first I thought it was stress, the pressure of fame finally getting to me. But deep down I knew better. One night I woke up to find the demon sitting at the foot of my bed. Its form was more defined now, its eyes glowing, its body shrouded in smoke. "You're doing well," it said, its voice low and menacing. "But there is still more to be done." "What do you want from me?" I whispered, tears streaming down my face. It leaned closer, its breath cold against my skin. "I want everything." The events Eleanor brought me to became darker, more twisted. At one party, I witnessed a ritual that left me shaking. A young woman, barely out of her teens, was brought to the center of the room. She was dressed in white, her face pale with fear. The attendees surrounded her, chanting in a language I didn't understand. And then, without warning, they descended on her. I turned away, but Eleanor grabbed my arm. "You need to watch," she said firmly. "This is what you are a part of." I couldn't look, but I couldn't leave either. The woman's screams echoed in my mind long after they stopped. I started hearing rumors about the girl who had been dropped from the label. Some said she had tried to expose the truth, to warn others about what was happening behind the scenes. Others claimed she had disappeared, taken by the very people she had tried to defy. I wanted to reach out to her, to find out if she was still alive, but I knew that doing so would put me in even more danger. The Illuminati didn't tolerate betrayal. The next time I saw Mr. D, he was different. There was something in his eyes, something ancient and inhuman. "You're progressing well," he said, his smile cold. "But there's one more step you need to take." He handed me a contract written in blood. "This will solidify your place in the hierarchy," he explained. "Sign it, and your power will be unmatched." I stared at the contract, my hands trembling. "What happens if I don't?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His smile widened, revealing sharp, unnatural teeth. "Then you lose everything." I signed it. The moment my pen touched the paper, the room darkened. A chill ran through my body and I felt a searing pain in my chest. The demon's voice echoed in my mind, laughing, reveling in my despair. "You're ours now," it said. "Forever." That night, I performed at another sold-out concert. The crowd was larger than ever, their energy feeding the darkness within me. As I sang, I felt the demon take over completely. My voice was no longer mine. My movements controlled by something else. The audience was entranced, their faces filled with an unnatural euphoria. And for the first time, I realized the full extent of my power and my prison. My life had become an unending nightmare. I had everything I thought I wanted: wealth, fame, power. Yet every moment felt like I was walking through a shadowy abyss. The demon no longer lingered in the background, it was ever present. I could feel it in the studio, on stage, even in the brief moments of silence I clung to at night. Its voice was louder now, commanding, relentless. "More," it whispered as I wrote songs. "Deeper, darker." I complied, pouring my soul, what little was left of it, into the music. The lyrics grew more twisted, the melodies more haunting. Critics hailed it as genius. But I knew the truth. The demon wasn't just inspiring me, it was creating through me. During recording sessions, my voice would take on an otherworldly quality, layered with harmonics that no human throat could produce. "You're unstoppable," my team said, but their faces betrayed their fear. They knew something wasn't right. The parties became worse. What started as lavish celebrations of success turned into grotesque spectacles of depravity. The elite gathered in hidden mansions, their laughter echoing through opulent halls. At one event, I was taken to a private room. A man, someone I recognized as a world leader, greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're special," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You've proven your loyalty." I didn't respond. My mind was too numb to process his words. What followed was something I can barely speak of. I was passed around like an object, my body a commodity for their twisted pleasures. Every touch, every whisper, every act left scars that no one could see. The rituals grew darker. I was no longer a passive observer. Now I was an active participant. At one gathering, I stood in a circle with other celebrities, politicians, and CEOs. In the center of the room was an altar, stained with blood. A child was brought forward, their cries echoing in the chamber. I wanted to scream, to run, to stop what was about to happen. But the demon's voice stopped me. "Obey," it said, its tone icy. "You belong to us." And so I stood there silent, as the unthinkable unfolded before me. The demon began to take more from me. It wasn't satisfied with my music, my body, my soul. Now it wanted my mind. I started hearing voices, whispers that grew louder with each passing day. They mocked me, reminded me of the chains around my soul, the flames that awaited me. I stopped sleeping, afraid of the nightmares that awaited me. When I closed my eyes, I saw visions of hell, a vast fiery expanse filled with tortured souls, their screams echoing endlessly. And in the center of it all, I saw myself, chained, my body consumed by flames, my soul crying out for a salvation that would never come. Despite the horror, my career soared. My albums broke records, my tours sold out within minutes, my face adorned every magazine cover. I launched fashion lines, invested in real estate, partnered with global brands. I was a billionaire now, my empire sprawling, my influence unmatched. But none of it brought me peace. My mansion felt like a tomb, its halls filled with whispers, its mirrors reflecting not my image, but the demons. Every smile I forced for the cameras, every laugh I faked in interviews, felt like another nail in my coffin. The demon's presence became physical. One night, as I stood in front of a mirror, I saw it behind me. Its form was monstrous, its eyes burning with an unholy light. It reached out, its clawed hand brushing against my shoulder. "You are mine," it said, its voice reverberating through my skull. I screamed, shattering the mirror, but when I looked down, the shards reflected its image, not mine. I tried to escape. I left the city, retreating to a secluded villa far from the chaos. But the demon followed me. It appeared in the shadows, its voice a constant presence. "You cannot run," it said. "You cannot hide." Even in the isolation, I felt its chains tightening around my soul. Eleanor visited me, her expression unreadable. "You're falling apart," she said bluntly. "The label is concerned." "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't live like this." She sighed, her eyes filled with something almost resembling pity. "This is what you signed up for," she said. "You wanted the world and now you have it." Her words were a bitter reminder of the choice I had made. That night I stood on the balcony, staring at the horizon. The city lights sparkled in the distance, a stark contrast to the darkness inside me. I thought about jumping, ending it all, escaping the torment, but the demon's voice stopped me. "You can't escape," it said. "Even in death, you are mine." And so I stood there, trapped, a prisoner of my own choices. I no longer felt human. Every step I took felt heavy, as if invisible chains were dragging me down. My reflection, once a source of vanity, had become my worst enemy. The face staring back at me wasn't my own. The demon's influence grew more insidious. It wasn't just a shadow in the background anymore. It was inside me, controlling my thoughts, my emotions, my very essence. The breaking point came during a live performance. The venue was massive, the crowd roaring with anticipation. The energy in the air was palpable, charged with an unnatural intensity. As I stepped onto the stage, the lights dimmed and the music began. But something was different. The demon wasn't just present, it was taking over. My movements weren't my own, my voice distorted and otherworldly. The audience was entranced, their eyes glowing faintly, their bodies swaying as if under a spell. I could feel their souls being pulled towards me, feeding the darkness within. When the final note rang out, the crowd erupted in thunderous applause. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Backstage, Eleanor greeted me with a smile. "That was incredible," she said. "You're unstoppable." I wanted to scream at her, to tell her I wasn't in control, that this wasn't me, but the words wouldn't come. The torment didn't stop when the curtain fell. The demon followed me everywhere, its voice a constant whisper in my mind. "You wanted this," it reminded me. "This is the price you pay." I tried to drown it out with pills, alcohol, anything that could numb the pain, but nothing worked. The nights were the worst. I couldn't sleep without seeing visions of hell, a fiery abyss filled with tortured souls, their screams echoing endlessly. And always I saw myself, chained, burning, crying out for a salvation that would never come. One night I received a call from a journalist. They wanted to interview me, to write an expose on the hidden side of the music industry. At first I hesitated. Speaking out could ruin me, or worse. But something inside me, perhaps the last shred of humanity I had left, urged me to accept. We met in a small cafe, far from the prying eyes of the public. The journalist, a young woman with piercing blue eyes, asked questions that cut deeper than I expected. "What did you sacrifice to get where you are?" she asked. I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. "Everything," I whispered. Her expression hardened. "Is it worth it?" Before I could answer, I felt the demon's presence. Its voice filled my mind, angry, threatening. "Leave," it commanded. "Now!" I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't do this." I left the cafe, the journalist's questioning gaze following me. The nightmares intensified. I started waking up with scratches on my body, my sheets soaked with sweat. One night, I woke to find the demon sitting on my chest, its eyes glowing, its grin malicious. "You belong to me," it said, its voice reverberating through my skull. "There is no escape." I screamed, thrashing, but it didn't budge. When I finally broke free, I was gasping for air, my heart racing. The scratches on my body were deeper now, bleeding. Desperate for answers, I turned to an old priest, a man known for his expertise in exorcisms. He listened to my story, his face pale, his hands trembling. "You've made a grave mistake," he said. "The devil doesn't bargain fairly." "I need help," I pleaded. "I can't live like this anymore." He nodded, his expression grave. "We can try," he said. "But you must understand, breaking a pact with the devil is nearly impossible. The consequences will be severe." The exorcism was a harrowing experience. The priest chanted prayers, his voice steady despite the oppressive presence in the room. The demon fought back, its laughter echoing, its voice mocking. "She's mine," it said, its tone triumphant. "You can't save her." My body convulsed, my screams tearing through the room. Images of hell flashed before my eyes. Flames, chains, endless suffering. The priest continued, his prayers growing louder, more urgent. For a moment I felt the demon weaken, its hold loosening. But then, with a final guttural roar, it surged back, stronger than before. The room went silent, the air heavy with defeat. The priest shook his head, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry," and he said, "it's too strong." I left the church, my hopes shattered. The demon's voice was louder than ever, its laughter a constant reminder of my fate. "You thought you could escape?" it taunted. "You're mine, forever." I realized then that there was no salvation for me. My soul was lost, chained in the fiery depths of hell, and no amount of fame, fortune, or power could ever fill the void within me. The years had stripped me of everything that once felt real. The music, the fame, the wealth, all of it felt like a distant dream, a hollow existence that no longer mattered. My life had become a grotesque parody of success. The demon's presence was undeniable now, inescapable. It had long since consumed my mind, and my body no longer felt like my own. The fame I once craved had turned into a prison, a gilded cage where I was both the prisoner and the executioner of my own soul. I tried to run again, hoping for a miracle, some way to break free. But the demon always found me. Its voice echoed in every room, in every dark corner of my mind. "You will never escape," it whispered, its breath cold and heavy against my ear. "You belong to me. Your soul is mine, and there is no redemption for you." I tried to remember who I once was, the girl who sang in that small, dimly lit bar, the girl with dreams of stardom. But that girl was long gone, lost to the darkness I had willingly embraced. I was alone in my mansion that night, the silence oppressive, when the truth finally settled in. The people I had trusted, the label, Eleanor, the powerful men who had controlled my every move, had all abandoned me. They never cared for me. I was just another puppet, another soul to be bought and sold. I could feel the chains tightening, both around my heart and my spirit. The walls of the mansion closed in, pressing me down, suffocating me. I could hear the laughter, the faint whispers of those who had once celebrated me, those who had consumed my very soul for their own dark pleasures. But now their faces were twisted, their eyes hollow, reflecting the same emptiness that now defined me. The clock struck midnight. I stood before the mirror, my reflection warped, distorted. The face staring back at me was no longer human. It was the demon, its eyes glowing with malevolent fire. "Are you ready?" it asked, its voice both familiar and foreign. I didn't respond, but I knew, deep down, that this was the moment. The room darkened, the temperature dropping to an unbearable chill. Shadows danced around me, flickering and swirling. I could feel the weight of the demon's presence closing in, its power crushing me. "You've done well," it said, its tone mocking. "You've given everything. Your soul is mine, just as you promised." The chains in my mind began to pull tighter, the weight of them unbearable. I could feel myself slipping, losing myself entirely to the darkness. The last vestiges of humanity within me were screaming for release, but they were silenced by the demon's will. I closed my eyes, ready for the inevitable. But then something changed. A surge of warmth, a brief flicker of light, something that felt real. The demon hissed, a low, guttural sound, and the pressure around me grew stronger. "You dare defy me?" it roared, its voice shaking the walls. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't understand it. But for the first time in years, I felt something other than darkness. I opened my eyes and saw nothing. The mansion, the world, everything around me had vanished. I was suspended in an endless void. The demon's voice was still there, but now it was distorted, weak, like it was losing its grip. "You cannot escape me," it snarled. "You are mine for eternity." But the light inside me, the faint flicker of humanity, pushed back. Suddenly, the void split, and I found myself standing on the edge of a precipice. Below me, a vast ocean of fire stretched into eternity. My body trembled as I looked into the abyss, feeling its pull, the cold, unrelenting grasp of hell itself. "This is your fate," the demon hissed from behind me. "This is where you belong." I turned, and for the first time, I saw it for what it truly was. A monstrous, writhing entity of pure darkness, its form ever-changing, its eyes endless pits of hunger. I felt no fear anymore. I had sold my soul, yes. I had made my choices, yes. But in that moment, I knew that I was still me. The light inside me grew stronger, blinding, engulfing everything. The demon screamed, its form writhing in agony. "You cannot fight me," it bellowed. "I own you. You cannot escape." But I was no longer listening. The light that had been trapped inside me, hidden beneath layers of greed, pain, and darkness, burst forth, pushing everything away, shattering the chains that had bound me for so long. For the first time, I was free. But as the light consumed the demon, I realized something horrifying. There was no escape from my choices. The chains had not just been spiritual, they had been woven into every part of me. My soul had been irrevocably torn, its essence forever marked by the pact I had made. Even though I was free from the demon, I knew my soul would never be whole again. I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. My heart pounded in my chest, but I wasn't in the mansion. I was back in my old room, the one I had slept in before fame took over. The music, the fame, the darkness, everything felt like a distant memory, yet it still clung to me. I could feel the chains again, just beneath the surface. I had been freed from the demon, but I had no peace. The cost of my soul was far greater than I had ever imagined. And now, no matter where I went, no matter what I did, I would always carry the weight of my choices, haunted by the chains I had forged in hell. As I stood in the stillness, I realized one terrible truth. I was a prisoner not of the devil, but of myself, and no amount of light could ever heal the damage I had done.